I'm very pleased to introduce you to Matt Manuli here. He's graduated in 2013. He was a double major, actually, in French and English, and he went on to complete an MA in government at Georgetown. And then he spent some time in the DC area working for Western Union as an analyst. And among other things, I'm sure he can talk to us more about what his job looked like there, but among other things, he investigated financial crimes. And I want to hear more about that. So, and very recently, he took a job as a senior risk analyst at Santander Bank in Boston. So he's made a bit of a transition from the DC area up closer to home here. Then we have Lenny Ritigliano. He graduated in 2014. I remember very well that he was embarking on a student-teacher apprenticeship while completing a senior thesis. I'm sure Lenny has no recollection of this.
Oh,
but,
no.
Yeah,
I tend to blank that out.
So he's gone on to get a master's in educational technology at St. Joe's, and he teaches English in Newington, Connecticut, where he combines his love of English lit with an interest in teaching and technology. And then all the way to my left, I have Meredith Wilson, and she graduated from Trinity in 2009. And none of us can quite believe that we feel like she was just here. So she started out as an employer of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, working in a variety of positions before moving to her current position as digital marketing manager for KEDS. So let's just give them a hello, welcome back. A good question to ask to start off would be to get each of you to take a minute to describe your current job in a little more detail. Maybe walk us through a typical day and tell us what you might like most about the work that you're currently doing. So I don't know, who wants to go first? Matt, you want to?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really happy that so many people showed up. This is really cool. So I recently took a job at Santander Bank as a senior risk analyst, so literally like just a few months into it, so I don't know as much about it as I would like, but I can talk a lot about the financial crime world, the financial analyst world. It's something that I did not even really know that existed when I started, and I guess, so Western Union, on the day-to-day you have 5 days in a week. 4 days of it are investigating alerts that are just huge data sets of financial transactions. And what you do is if you see something that looks odd, you get to write up a narrative. And that narrative gets sent to the higher-ups, and they can eventually file it with the Treasury Department for a suspicious activity report or a concerning transaction report. And there's a lot of, I think, things we can talk about later about being a English major and writing good narratives, using evidence, thinking chronologically, and being able to detail a financial crime from start to finish. And I think particularly English majors are well suited for this in ways that maybe other people that came to the job with strictly business backgrounds or maybe tech backgrounds were not. So I'll be happy to talk about that later, but that's about what I did there for a few years.
So just a quick question, has your daily sort of your typical day changed very much from your shift from Western Union to your Boston job, or?
Yes, yeah. So the new job is more of a controls testing job. Basically, at every big financial institution, you have a list of controls, which are double checks and steps to mitigate risks that the bank has, whether it's fraud or insider trading or loans that are bad. You're supposed to report every year this huge list of every risk that the bank has as you see it, and then what you do to mitigate that. And as an English major, I think it's really helpful to be able to state risks so they're not ambiguous, and state the things that you're going to do to prevent them from happening in ways that are very clear, so that when the government or an auditor comes in, they know exactly what you meant by, we are going to, check this percentage or this level every day before the transaction clears. And I think if you're a sloppy writer and you're writing a risk assessment of a certain product or a certain area of the bank or the area of the company that's being reviewed, that's going to get caught and it's going to get you guys possibly in a lot of trouble and fined, but more likely just a lot of hectic, long nights trying to correct what you guys meant by we are actually going to review this type of transaction this many times before it goes through. So yeah, that's kind of the two different sides of what I do. They're very different, and I know the other side a lot better, but I'd be happy to talk more about kind of what I'm learning now. It's a slightly different field, but it's all financial crime, financial intelligence stuff.
I'm the, I guess, bad cliche of what can you do with an English major? Teach, and that's me. But it really is more than that. But I do teach high school, so my day, it's the weird profession where it's very structured, but every day is a new experience, that's for sure. You never know what's going to come at you, while at the same time you know that bell is going to ring at a certain time and it's going to go forward. But I think, I teach 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade, and it's a very different experience being on the other side and kind of seeing the curtain pulled aside and seeing all the magic that happens behind. And so a typical day would be me coming in, and if I beat the traffic, I'd get to check my email and go through and catch up with any parents that I might be able to send at that point. I try to look at research to keep current. I do subscribe to certain education magazines so I can be up on the current instructional methods. I do believe in that. Then I'll have my classes, and the best laid plans, I'll set them out, and hopefully the kids catch on. And there's days where usually they do, and then sometimes, kids are kids and things happen and you have to roll with those punches. But I think that's one of the good parts for me, or the parts that keeps it interesting, is that it's not the same thing every year. And the year begins and it ends, and you go through all these emotions that we went through as students, but then there's the other level of now you're even more invested as the teacher, because this is what you're producing with them. And it's just very rewarding. It's a very rewarding career, because I get to continue using everything that I gain from the people in this room, and then give it back. And that's the piece that's really important to me, that being able to give it back to the kids.
What's Newington like as a town and as a school district?
Newington's suburban. It's a suburban town. It is a big suburban town. We have over 1,200 kids in the high school. We have 4 elementary schools that feed into 2 middle schools, and then the 1 high school where I'm at. It is very diverse, or I shouldn't say very diverse, but it is diverse for a suburban town. I did teach in Hartford first at Sport and Medical Sciences Academy, and that I learned a great deal from that. And then the economy went bad, and I had to jump ship, and it was tough because I did feel very connected at that school. And it's sad, some things in education, it's sad how money's mismanaged and not appropriated where it needs to be. But I did move to a great place. I really enjoy where I'm at now, at Newington.
Meredith.
So I work at Keds. So for those who don't know, that's a sneaker brand. We're based in Boston. I work on the digital marketing team. So my biggest role there is executing all of the content that goes out daily on our social channels. But we are a global business, so I'm also setting the strategy for how all of our international partners are talking about our brand in their respective regions. So it's a lot of working collaboratively with different people across our organization. I feel like my average day is kind of a race to the finish. It feels like I get in with one idea of what my day is going to be like, and then it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of adapting to what's happening that day or in our business. But I like that there are different ways that I can be creative every day, and I think that's really what my favorite part of this job is.
Do you want to say a little more about whether this was the job that you imagined that you would be doing?
It's definitely not.
Okay, so say more.
Yeah, so when I graduated from Trinity, I knew that I loved writing, I knew that I loved reading. It seemed like a natural progression to go into publishing to me. So it was also 2009, which was not a great time to be looking for a job. I moved home. I'm from Boston, and so I lived at home for a year or two, and I did 4 or 5 different internships in kind of like whatever writing adjacent field I could find. Wrote for a lot of like community blogs in Boston, like you name it, I was trying to get them to let me do some writing. I finally ended up getting a job at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, which is a publisher based in Boston. My first job there was assisting the publisher, which I actually loved. She was someone who had been in the industry forever, so she had some really great knowledge of how publishing worked. But it also allowed me, I essentially followed her around every day, so I got to see all different areas of the business, and I thought I wanted to be an editor. That's kind of the glamorous side of publishing that people know about, and very quickly learned that that was not something I was interested in. So I started doing marketing and PR when I was there, and did that for 5 or 6 years. I helped them start their social media channels, and then that's kind of what segued me into my role that I'm in now.
Nice. And Lenny, you had some idea, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is,
I knew.
Yeah, yeah.
From the beginning, I knew.
And were there ways in which you felt like Trinity did an okay job of preparing you for, did you find
more than an okay job.
for your way? So do you want to just talk a little bit about your job search process, kind of moving from senior year into?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. No, Trinity, I really feel, and I do say that I got the best of both worlds, because there is this idea, like when you're going into public education, K to 12, that if you know you're going to do that, go to like one of the schools where it's seen as like vocational. You're going to go learn to be a teacher, you're going to just learn to teach, and that's the end of it. You'll maybe know a little bit about your content, and that's it. But that is the impression, unfortunately, that's out there. But by taking my major here, and then through the University of St. Joseph, there is the Hartford Consortium that allowed me, really from my sophomore year to senior year, to take some classes in education there and receive my certification at the same time that I'm getting my degree here. So it was really a double major because of the equivalent. I was able to get like what we think of as the typical liberal arts experience that Trinity beautifully offers, while getting the practical and theoretical knowledge that then allows me to go and teach. And even in talking to some of my colleagues, I can see at both schools, I can see kind of the difference that my having gone to Trinity has, what I've been able to bring to the classroom. It's a different level to have that liberal arts kind of thinking and the critical thinking behind it, and knowing kind of where, like the kids who are aspiring to be at a school like Trinity, what you need to have to be successful here. And I'm grateful that I got to do both of those, because as you said, I did know from the beginning that I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't know the roundabout way that we'd get there, but it is turned out to be the best of both worlds, and I am forever grateful about that.
And do you want to just say a little more about the teaching and technology component? Because that does seem like the new thing that, in terms of the certifications and kind of ways in which that seems like a growing interest for you,
yep.
right?
Google owns me, basically. I don't get the pay from Google, but that's a different story. But technology is, it's always been this idea that we're incorporating technology into the classroom, and it's something that is very new for some of the more veteran teachers. It's still in some ways very new for me. I always feel like I'm learning something new, but I also understand when I moved to Newington that this is part of our students' lives. This is part of all of our lives. Who doesn't have a phone in here right now and is going to look up information? And I truly believe in the philosophy of the kids have the technology. It's not like we can say, like, put it away, never use it, because we all use it, and it can be used productively to learn. And so rather than pushing away from it, I feel it's part of my responsibility as a teacher now that I have to show the students how to use it appropriately to learn. So for instance, I don't think I could teach now without the Google Suite, Google Classroom. I can create what would be like a graphic organizer, and where before I'd have to go to the copy machine and print it out. And there's still those occasions, and it's horrible, to go do those copies. I can send it to the students all at once, and they can share the document and collaborate on it together, and I can walk around and give them feedback and say, this is going well, or I think you should think about this, and then we can talk about it together. We pull it up on the smartboard, and there's just things with, if you know how to use technology for learning, that you can do that, say, when most of us were in school, you couldn't do. That just passing a piece of paper, you couldn't. Not to say there's not the place for that, because I still believe in annotations. Your handwriting on that page, we all know as English majors, if Barnes & Noble goes down, I don't know what I'm going to do, you know. I need the hardcover book. So, but that is part of, I do believe in using the technology appropriately.
Yeah, interesting. So Matt, well, you too. Were you actively looking for a job, like in your senior year, that was different from what you ended up doing? You said there was graduate school in between there, but
there was graduate school in between. I remember specifically talking to Professor Hager about law school and Professor Rosen about grad school. I sort of, like, at the time in my friend group, a lot of people were saying, like, the grad school is the easy way out. You get a year or two to like fool around and do stuff. But I think for me, I really wanted to go into journalism originally. That's why I went to DC, to all those news outlets down there. There's if you guys don't know, The Atlantic is down there. They have a really good program for young writers and for people who work on the business side as well. All the major news networks are there. And I had a chance to intern at on the Hill for a senator with the press secretary, and that was like my first fall there, was grad school and doing that during the day, and that gave me a real good look into that world. And I quickly realized that I just did not like it for a lot of reasons. It just was. If you're not on Twitter, which I wasn't, or Instagram and all that stuff, and you don't follow politics, like I thought I followed politics, but if you don't know, like, who's running for lieutenant governor of, Michigan, and you don't have an opinion on that, it's just that those type of people do journalism in DC. And it's a great place to get your feet wet if you want to do that. And there's a lot of great, I think everyone thinks of New York to automatically go to for journalism. But if you do, you will get chances in DC to write, and to edit, and to even be on TV, or to do PR, which I think, so I don't want to discount that whole thing. It just wasn't for me. So then eventually I worked as a research assistant, I worked at a think tank, and I landed at the Treasury Department, just totally randomly my second year of grad school, and that's when I started to do financial crime. I worked at the Office of Foreign Asset Control, which is the office that puts sanctions on individuals in other countries, and this was right around the time of, like Ukraine and Russia, everything was happening then, the Yemen civil war was starting, so I was starting to think about this as a career, and I was like, this is really cool. It was very, very interesting, very, you have to have international relations experience, you have to have critical thinking, math and data skills. And then I couldn't really work at the Treasury Department, because that's sort of, if you want to apply to like jobs in DC, I sort of got the feel for it, and those things are kind of slow, like State Department, Treasury Department, they kind of hire in a cycle. It's sort of slow. It's based on how much money they get from the government every year. So I moved to the private sector, and there was a lot of places down there, consulting firms that were hiring to essentially do work for the State Department and the Treasury Department and the Defense Department, which is just how that city cycles, in like 2-year cycles pretty much. So it was a great place to start, I think. At Western Union, that's sort of how I landed there, pretty much right after I did that internship. I was graduating and just throwing out a ton of applications, and one day I got a call from an HR person in Colorado, and they're like, hey, we have an office in DC, do you want to interview here? And of course I was like, yes, this is like the I don't know how many applications I threw out and how many interviews I did first rounds and didn't get through, and then second rounds and get through. I think that's a big part of it too, is if you could get really lucky and maybe the first job you ever get out of school is like the first interview you have, but probably that's not going to happen. So I think it was really important that you just, keep at it, maybe update stuff on your resume, rework your cover letter, do networking, things like that. And I think also just get a sense for the city and kind of the big industries within it. That's why I would definitely recommend moving to the city that you want to work in before you go there. Just because I know
Interesting.
You're just there, and you can network with people in real time. You don't have to imagine what the landscape is like. I think I really learned a lot just by meeting with other interns and talking with professors and other kids in my class about maybe they had worked on the Hill or something. So that's how I got there. It definitely was not smooth. There was a lot of jump starts and stops. But I think it's important that sometimes when you start a career and you might have this grand idea of what it's going to be like I thought I was just going to walk down there and like the Washington Post was going to be like, here's your op-ed column. And it just doesn't happen like that. You have to like do Twitter like feeds for senators for like 4 years before you even get to write anything. But like that's good. And sometimes learning what you don't want to do and what is actually pretty important. In a lot of ways, like you don't want to be stuck, and you don't want to realize that too late. I think first thing I realized after I did it for about like 6 months. It's about how long the cycle goes. And I was like, I just don't think this is for me. So I just pivoted and still had another year left of school, and that's sort of how everything worked out.
Interesting. So graduate school for you was a way to get to a place.
Yeah, it was a way to get to...
It gave you a platform for which you could do further exploration, but you didn't close yourself off from any of that. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, so in that sense, I mean, one of the questions we like to ask is, what are your thoughts about grad school? When do you think students should do grad school? And you're saying right away, if it gets you to where you want to go, right? But not wait a few years, don't get burnt out,
That's a really hard question.
Yeah.
So grad school for me was a Master of Arts in Government at Georgetown. Grad school for other people might mean business school or law school or maybe Masters of Arts in Education. Like some of these you really do need to like be a teacher or to work in a law firm. For me, this is kind of like an in-between degree. You don't necessarily need to have a master's to start out at a company. In a lot of ways, sometimes it can hold you back. But for me, I didn't. When I was looking at like what I had done at Trinity, I did a lot of extracurricular stuff. I had the radio station. I did the tripod, things like that. And I just didn't think that was going to really set me apart right away. I never found out what would have happened if I had applied. So I'm just thinking maybe people would have been like, oh, that's great, and they would have hired me right away. So I thought that I needed another year at least to get some more substantive internships and like real work at maybe a company or in the government. But I wouldn't say like you have to go to grad school to get a job. Like
no, it's just an interesting take. I guess in some sense what I'm hearing too is that, I mean, for Lenny it was an apprenticeship through a fairly structured system of certification. For Meredith it was internships, right? And for you too, it sounds like those aspects were important to get to where you are now. Do you think that any kind of internships at Trinity would have been helpful, or do you think that it was just a matter of getting yourself, Meredith, that would be an interesting question for you, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that it would have made a difference to have done more professional exploration, or do you think that you needed to be networking in Boston to get where you are now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in terms of experience, I felt like my internships didn't necessarily, other than having work experience, they didn't necessarily give me what I needed in order to work in publishing, but it was a way for me to meet people and get my foot in the door.
Right.
And to have something to talk about when I did get my foot in the door. So for that reason, I think it was necessary, but I think a lot of it was because I did that in Boston and that's where I wanted to work.
Right.
So to your point, I think it really is helpful to be meeting people in the city that you want to work in. I think any experience is helpful, and I'm sure one more internship while I was here probably couldn't have hurt.
Right.
But, you know, it's also hard to know what exactly you're going to like until you try it. So I think especially for someone like me who wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do after I graduated, it could have maybe helped me narrow down the options a little bit. I think I probably went into your office, Professor Wheatley, and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do when I graduate. And you said, have you considered publishing? That feels like it might be the right thing for you. And I said, I haven't. I will look into that. So, you know, I think having the opportunity to maybe try some of those things while I was here would have maybe given me a better indication of if it was something I wanted to do.
The other thing I think too is you can find something here that even if it's not directly related, like yes, when I had a class that I had to go and do student teaching and that was required, that's more of like the apprenticeship. But I also think like I was a tour guide here and I believe I even got a lot out of that. Like even one of my principals who, when I was in high school and then I applied for that job when I thought I was going to go back to New York, had said teaching is like 90% acting. And sometimes it is, but it's not in the sense of like you don't know what you're doing or putting on a show. Even the best actors we know don't do that. It's you're in front of the room every day. You are kind of leading the show, so to speak. And I know like when I was a tour guide here at Trinity, it was like, you know, I knew when the joke was going to come. I knew like, oh, look at this building here. And a lot of that I think also helped me in the classroom for like preparation. It kind of is related, but it's not, you know. And so you have, maybe if you're thinking, if you kind of know where you want to go, I guess my point is, think of what else you could do that's here that is related, that will still give you some kind of experience.
Yeah.
Because it all adds up.
Meredith, what else did you do here at Trinity besides
I was a
take
tour guide
classes?
too.
You did? Oh,
I
you
was
were?
a tour guide, yeah. What else did I do? I did a lot of community service and extracurricular stuff there. I did a mentoring program, and I tutored at a school in an elementary school in Hartford while I was here. So kind of all over the place.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, I loved being a tour guide.
Yeah, Matt, you mentioned tripod and
Yes,
yeah.
I liked, as you guys know, we have, is it still creative writing and lit, right? Those
Yeah,
are
and we
the
have
two?
film and lit as well.
And, yeah, so I thought like, you know, writing articles, editing, I think that was really, really good. It gives you almost like a little just folder of stuff you can show people when, especially if you're applying to like I'm assuming like a magazine or a website or something. You can just say, here's my work, it's been published on this website. I think that's important to have, you know, just like a little book of things you've done, you know, that you can show off when at an interview or you're talking about it.
That's great. So, okay, so I feel like you've given us great advice about, you know, ways to think about the path to your current professions as being circuitous and that you shouldn't be nervous about that aspect of it. And I think actually even the sense that there may be things that you're doing right now that will lead you to, you know, be good at a future job that you don't even know you're preparing for, right? And to have some faith in that process. I'm not going to pick on anyone. Do any of you have particular horror stories about, you know, things absolutely that students should not do as they make the transition from, you know, from school to work? Does anyone want to share a horror story with us? I didn't prepare you guys with this beforehand, so you know, if you have any that you want to share, that's great. And if not, you could answer, you know, with like the best advice that you would give your young self, you know, your senior undergrad self.
It's not a horror story for me, because because I didn't do anything wrong. I mean, I didn't say I didn't live, though. I mean, like, that's kind of, but I do know that if you are thinking about pursuing the teaching profession K to 12, you are always a teacher. You are always a teacher, even when you think you're not in the real world. You are still a teacher, because you'll run into students, even if you don't live in the town. It's like, hey, Mr. R. I'm like, oh my gosh, but I can't run away. But there was a case when I was doing my student teaching at St. Joe. We had a seminar in the same way that we have the seminar for the senior thesis here. And there was a case where one of the professors, or somehow it came to their attention, that someone was complaining about student teaching. I don't know why. It's the most grueling experience. And it was like all over, I guess, Facebook or something. And we came into that seminar that day, and right on the smartboard was like all of these comments about like the kids and this and that. And it was really, really bad. And this person, we didn't know who it was, almost got kicked out of the program. There was like a whole investigation. And that's something that I try to tell the kids too. What we are, and I think like even you have the book about surveillance and everything, and it's like everything is documented. I mean, I was like, this is it. So you have to be careful. Like, you just have to be aware of what you're posting. Words have meaning. Like, we know that better than anybody in this major. Words have meaning. And it will come back, so I think it did.
I can think of one. I could think of, so when I think of horror stories, I think of like horrible bosses, things like that. I think what I learned early on is that having a good boss at your job it could be the worst job, the most menial job in the world, just data entry into spreadsheets all day. But if you have a good boss, you still like want to work with them and make it work. And you could have the best job. You could be, I don't know what your idea of the best job is, but if your boss is like, you could be like a graphic design, you could be like, I don't know, like work at Pixar in like designing movies or something. Stuff I could never do. Like, you could be a data genius and a great designer, but if your boss is really hard and really, really unfair, like judges you and grades you unfairly, that can just really, really make things horrible. So I guess I would say about horror stories is that I think when you start out like learning what's going to make you happy at each job, it might not be the ideal perfect job, but if your coworkers are constructive and your boss trusts you to get your work done on time, and the team is working together, it makes sometimes a job that when you came out of college you're like, well, this isn't a great job. Like, it can just make it a lot better, and it doesn't, it's not as bad. And I guess to the counterpoint is that you could think you landed the sweetest job in the world, but you get there the first day and you realize that your boss is really disorganized and always emails you at 5 o'clock saying, oh, I forgot to tell you have to do this by the end of the day. And just you can sense that. So that's what I would say for like horror stories is I've never had like the extremes, but I've definitely had bosses that I was like, all right, this person is really organized, and the team, we like trust her to make decisions, and we really work well together. And then another person who is gone all day, is very hard to get in touch with, doesn't really give, make decisions and give good answers. So that would be like my horror story, I guess.
I think to your point, I have had a really horrible boss, and not in the sense that she was horrible to me. It was the first job I had when I was assisting the publisher at Houghton Mifflin, and even on my interview, she did a great job of asking me about my English background and the writing I had done since graduating, and we talked for maybe half an hour, and then she kind of looked at me and said, just to be clear, what you're interviewing to do here is to do fucking everything. And I said, I didn't know what that meant, but I wanted a job. I wanted to work in publishing. I said, okay, like, sign me up. Turns out that meant, getting there before she would in the morning to turn the lamps on in her office. It meant thinking ahead of time about printing things on the largest possible paper because I knew she wouldn't be able to read it if I didn't, you know. But I quickly learned that if you pick up on those things and you build trust with your boss, you'll be given other opportunities. And so she started trusting me with projects that she knew I was there to do, other than turning her lamps on. And it ended up being an amazing experience. She had, you know, incredible experience in the industry, and so I'm so grateful to have learned from her. But I think had I kind of like shut down and been angry about the fact that I was turning on her lamps and many other things, I probably wouldn't have learned as much as I did from that job. So I think being able to kind of find the trust with your boss so that you can take on a little bit more if your job isn't exactly what you want it to be.
Interesting. So I guess it would be great to open this up. I'm sure there are questions that I'm forgetting to ask that any students or faculty could ask the panel at this point. What am I forgetting to ask these guys?
When you first came to Trinity, what did you picture yourself studying, or did you have any idea or no idea?
I actually started out with political science, believe it or not, and I took English classes all throughout my freshman and sophomore year, and I just realized that if I was going to spend 2 more years like doing this, I wanted to hang out with the people and the teachers in the English department a lot more. I don't know if any former political science people are here, but I just realized that like this was where I wanted to be, and like these type of people, this type of energy I wanted to feel for the next 2 years. I wasn't thinking, I would say like think about the subject you're most passionate in, and I feel like everyone here is probably inclined towards like languages or writing in some way, but I would say that major in something that you really, really like, because especially as you get into your later years at Trinity, you're going to be spending a lot of time, and if you write a thesis, so you should really you should really love it, and don't think that it's going to set you back when you come out of school, because that's, as we've shown, and I'm sure you can look on the Alumni website and talk to other people who graduated, it's not going to set you back. If anything, it's going to make you better once you get there. I think we've all kind of said ways where English has made us a better employee, a better coworker when we're in the office. I guess I started out really thinking political science, and then pivoted. I don't know when it happened. Maybe end of sophomore year, right? When do you declare majors? End of sophomore year, right? Yeah. That's probably about the point where I changed.
Well, I always knew that I was going to do this. I was always inspired by English in high school, and I actually had a teacher who, for those of you who have ever seen Boy Meets World, and Mr. Feeney, I had her in 7th grade. She moved up to the high school. I had her in 9th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade. I still see her sometimes over the summers now that we're both on same side kind of thing. So I knew I was always going in to English, but I think what solidified it was kind of what you were talking about, besides just passion, because that is key. I mean, people do great things with passion. Is that I remember before I came to Trinity, or agreed to come to Trinity, I sat in on, I think it was Professor Fisher's class. I think it was Chaucer. And like you were talking about with the energy and just like the feel of this department in particular, that where if you have a question, you can go to somebody who will answer, or multiple people who will answer, and professors will support you. The other majors are very engaged. And I can feel that, and I still remember that even just from that one class that I sat in on, that like this was where it was going to be. And then we went on our way.
I was actually between English and poli-sci, and so I took a lot of classes in both areas my freshman year, and English was kind of always like the storytelling piece of it, writing. It was what I loved most about poli-sci was the writing. So once I sat down and thought about it, I realized that English was where I should be spending my time. But I did kind of draw it out and wait until the very last minute to decide and officially declare, I think. But the great thing about Trinity is that you can keep taking classes in other areas, and that's what I really love too. I took some great science classes while I was here. No math classes, unless I had to, not that I can remember. But I loved that I could do a lot of different things, and I really enjoyed all the English classes that I had when I was here.
I kind of second that too. This idea that like even if you know you're taking English, one of the things that's great about Trinity is you can take classes in a wide variety of disciplines, and it still like feeds. You're still getting. They're all focused on thinking and getting you to really be like a more civically engaged person. I remember taking a couple of history classes, and I was like, wow, this is really. They fed together. I mean, I learned my English, and then some of the specific history classes were really interesting.
Other questions?
What do you miss about Trinity College?
What do you miss about us? No, just kidding.
You better say that. No, seriously, what do you miss?
Crime fiction.
Not being able to
Raymond
take some
Chandler,
classes that I wanted to in the major, but time. But in all seriousness, really, I do miss taking English classes. There was, and I was even talking to somebody about it the other day, the literary theory class that I took with Professor Rosen. I felt like it was one of the most challenging classes I've ever taken. I prepared my butt off for it, and I would go in and be like, I am unworthy. Leave feeling like, my mind was blown, and I'm like, as almost, what was it, a senior or junior, whatever it was, that I'm just unprepared and I'm the worst. But then I thought, like, the whole way back to, like, the Fred from Vernon, I was like, wow, that was so interesting. I was just thinking about it all the time. And even though I get to talk about literature every day with the kids, that's a different kind of English that we can make moves toward that in high school, but certainly not to that degree. And so I do miss taking many of these classes, that's for sure.
You don't miss anything.
No, I do. I think actually the same. I mean, I loved taking English classes here. I would love to come back for a year and sit in on English classes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Question?
Yeah, I was wondering, you guys talked about some of the extracurriculars you did at Trinity, but what are some of your extracurriculars now? Like, how do you balance work and life?
That's a great question.
That was a good question. I think, so every person's going to be different depending on how much your job takes up your day. I think you gotta be reasonable about it. I mean, I just like doing softball. That's like my thing. In Boston, we're still playing. We're playing tonight, and team is missing one player. So, but we're gonna be fine. But yeah, I mean, I think when I was in grad school, it's a little bit different. You can. The good thing about DC is there are talks going on every day about any subject. And they're all free, and they have free food, and you can just go and listen to people.
Or chili.
It's a really good place to do that. And you can, I think that was really, really fun to do I think don't forget about that part of life, especially once you start kind of getting into the 9-to-5 grind, and you're like, I'm just gonna go home, veg out, and not do anything. I think just, especially if you move to a new city where you might not know as many people, I don't know, if you like sports, do a sports thing. If you like books or improv, there's plenty of stuff with the arts too, depending on whatever city you're in. Just have one thing where that's your little one night a week, go do improv, or one night a week I'm going to do street hockey or softball or something. I think that'll help keep you sane too, because you can sort of just get in a cycle of going to work, come back home. But that's important, just to have, I don't know, it's different for every person, but just have that one thing that you do.
Yeah, I think actually my first 2 years, I want to say, when I was teaching in Hartford first, it was very easy to have that just become your life, all of a sudden just consumed by it, and especially when you have that, I came with a passion. I was like, I'm going to be awesome, I'm ready for this, I'm so excited, I finally get to do what I've been preparing for, and then And so like you're grading late, and then like the first year it's like, oh, this is cool, and then you're like, I'm on my millionth paper, and that quickly goes by. No, but there you can like burn out, and if it's something you're passionate about in the beginning, yes, you really want to spend all of your time doing it, but like you're sort of saying, it takes its toll if you don't balance that out. And at least for me, it was hard to do that, and I think. Like I still like to creatively write. It's been harder to do because you're working all day and we're still writing, or go to the movies. But you say I did what I could for today, and it's still going to be there tomorrow. I'm making progress toward it, but you also have to be a human being outside of your profession also.
Yeah, I think it can be a slippery slope to not give all of yourself to something, especially when you're in a new role and you're trying to prove yourself or take on more. But I think finding that balance is super important because you will burn out. I love doing yoga. I love spending time with friends. Interestingly, what I like most about yoga is not the actual exercise. It's that is like the 1 hour a day that I know I won't be looking at a screen, which is insane. But especially working in social media, I feel like you can have that, the ability to always be on is there, and so you kind of have to set those boundaries for yourself.
Good questions?
I just really want, because Matt made the good point that sometimes it's really important to find out what you don't like. And Meredith, you made just a brief passing reference to how you knew you did not want to be an editor.
Yeah.
I was curious if you would elaborate on how you knew that.
Sure. So, I've mentioned that I love reading and writing. What I don't love is working very closely with someone who has written something that they love that they don't want to change.
My career.
And I also didn't realize how long the process was, to be quite honest. And so the fact that you could be working on a project for 2 years or more was, a lot to me. And I was more drawn to, okay, we've created this amazing book together. How do we get it out into the world? And so that's kind of how I pivoted. But
Thanks. Anything else? This has been a wonderful opportunity. I really want to leave time for those of you who feel too shy to ask very public questions to come and talk to our panelists. But I just want to say thank you so much. This has been really informative. So thank you.